Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
I want to welcome everybody to this month's edition of the Calibration Point Podcast. And we've got one of our favorites on with us again, Bob Jones. And Bob, you've gotten to come on here and talk with us about many different things from your life as a corporate CEO, as a board member, community leader, philanthropist, succession, transition, identity. I mean, we've had so much fun with just different topics. And I so appreciate that because you have just a good understanding of I'd say just the social sector sandbox, that you pay such attention to things. And Bob, recently, and for our audience, you came across a really great article that was a transcript or an interview from someone that you've had, someone that you think a lot of, who was a former U.S. bank CEO, who was also at Make-A-Wish Foundation, I believe, and spurred your attention to bring it up to me. And so everybody knows, as I started talking with Bob about this, we thought it would be a really good podcast topic to talk about. And I've named it and you'll see as we go through the research, and I will have this out for everybody, but we've named this month's podcast, The Mission First Mindset. And that really sums up so many things. So Bob, I think maybe a way to start for everybody is if you could share just what triggered to you in what you heard in his talk. And then I want to give some context, and then we'll just unpack how do you socialize some of the concepts that he's brought up in his discussion points.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. It's always great to be with you, and thank you for all you do for the community. First of all, I'll start with saying this is a speech that Richard Davis gave. Richard Davis was chairman and CEO of U.S. Bank and one of my idols in the banking industry. He was just one of those people that really understood that banking was all about giving it back and making sure communities were strong and doing what was right. When Richard retired, he went to run the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And this was a context of a speech he gave, and it was one of those things that you read and you're kind of like that VA commercial, like, wow, absolutely, It just makes so much sense that each and every day that when you're in the social services sector or the mission first sector, you should wake up every day as a board member, as an employee, as a CEO, and think about what is our mission and how are we impacting that mission. And so many times as a board member, you get that reverse, like how do we raise more money, or what do we do about costs? What do we do this? If you get that passion for the mission, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's kind of the context of Richard's speech.
And what I loved, so whenever you had shared this with me, it just really harkened back to me over, when we go back the last 25 years, but probably more so the last 10 to 12, there have been some pretty significant pushes in the nonprofit sector, even legislatively, to push for a rebrand of the third sector, of the nonprofit sector, and just kind of calibrating that so everybody is on the same page. The not-for-profit sector, which is interesting, I believe it's the Greek profit means to advance. And so we immediately have a sector that's framed around not advancing, which we all know is not the case. And the other piece of that is that when you look at the nonprofit sector, our mission favorite activity is where we lose money as an organization. So we simply have to cross-subsidize that. And there have been lots of movements from reframing it to the social sector, impact sector, social impact sector, mission critical. And what I liked about what you shared, Bob, and we can kind of walk through some of the points, was that it kind of moved past whether we ever are successful in rebranding the sector. It moved to a point of, hey, let's just change the vernacular with your board. Let's start to socialize new concepts and new paradigms of thinking about things that, and I think about your excellence in just board leadership and civic leadership. The things that I've read in this research you sent, and again, for everybody, I'm going to also put it out in the newsletter this month, are things that I know you already think about, but it was really fascinating to say, okay, well, what happens if we just go ahead and socialize it into the fabric of our discussions?
Yeah.
Um,
Jamie,
yeah,
it's as simple as just changing the way you run a board meeting, the way you recruit board members, and what you do in your board meetings. And, the point that Richard Davis makes is we're not pursuing profit. We're really pursuing a mission. And
right.
I think anybody that joins a board needs to understand and believe in the mission, not just to check a resume box and say, "Oh, I'm on a board of XYZ." You go there because you have a passion for it. And I think that's the concept of what he's trying to say is that you need to understand it, you need to walk it, you need to talk it, you need to not just raise funds, but raise friends based on the mission of what you're doing.
Yeah. I've got a client, a board member of one of our clients made a comment one time in a board meeting. It's probably last year sometime. And the point he made to the rest of his board was economics aside, if you weren't willing to work for this organization, you shouldn't be on our board. And
No.
it was really powerful. It got a lot of people thinking like, yeah, economics aside, would I work here? And it forced them to have to think about how they would answer that question.
And do I believe in the mission?
Right.
One of the things I've seen done and have done myself is you begin the board meeting with some focus on the mission, whether it's a client that's been impacted by the mission, by an associate at the organization that's been impacted, or somebody else that's been impacted. And it just serves to set the tone for the meeting that, oh, we're here to talk about the mission. We're not here to talk about, yeah, we got to raise money, but a lot easier to raise money when you have a passion for something, right? So,
Right. And to your point, and Mr. Davis makes I guess the really kind of the whole pinnacle of his thought process was we should rebrand our thinking instead of not for profit, just start thinking everything by way of for mission. So when you think of your organization, think of it as for mission first. And you've got 9 points in his areas, and I'm just going to hit a couple of these, Bob, and we can kind of unpack them. And so one, you've already mentioned it, but be sure that we have total clarity on what for mission means in the organization that I'm serving as a board member of. And am I reflecting that as a witness in who I am, which is number two, which then number three goes into, and you've talked about this before, but in other categories that you've been on our podcast with before was, okay, how can I tell the story? And the point that Mr. Davis makes is if you're thinking for mission first, it's going to change how you're going to tell the story. Anything that has stuck out to you on that in your career, both in the
yeah.
for-profit and nonprofit perspective?
Yeah, you think about it, the not-profit world, but so many times one of our goals as a board member is to raise friends and funds. You go into a meeting and say, "Oh, we desperately need money because we're behind in our bills." That's a tough message to sell, but if you go in and say, "I desperately believe in behavioral health and the impact this is having on the children." Let me tell you a story about Johnny. Johnny
Yep.
came to us, he went through a program. Johnny's now number 2 in his class, and it's all because of the stuff we've done. I'd rather give to something that's gonna make a difference than somebody that's just trying to plug a hole, and so many times in this world, you get caught up in the financials, which again, I'm a banker, they're very important, but
Mm,
it's easier to sell something that is the mission rather than the result, and
yeah.
that result is, we've gotta just do a much better job of selling the mission and do a better job of telling stories and supporting the people that work for that mission.
Yeah. And his fourth and fifth points on this was, so number four was the idea, and you've already kind of hit it. If we're thinking about building relationships around for mission, then everything, every donor, every volunteer, every person I connect with, my first filter isn't what's your on paper profile. It's, do you align to what the mission is about?
Yeah.
And the same with employees, and hit the fifth point, which I thought was really good as well. And that is the idea that our employees, our staff, and I would say volunteers, have to be mission first minded. If they're not here because of a mission first mindset, we're going to see that come out in the process. And this, and be great if you could share as well. And on that, I mean, one of the challenges as you get into mid-size and bigger organizations is it's easy to start to rationalize, well, it's okay if someone's here because they're doing the job and they're not huge advocates of the mission. It is more of a paycheck, but we've got to fill a spot and I've got somebody who can do the job. I have to believe in your career, both as a nonprofit board member and as a large corporate CEO, that you run into that same issue even when you have bigger numbers in your budget and your willingness as an organization to violate this for mission employee perspective.
Yeah. Jamie, it's really what you're talking about is just how do you build a culture? And you want to create a culture that people want to be a part of. And, sometimes people will self-select. If you're there just to get a paycheck, you're going to look around and see everybody else who's got a real passion for the mission. And you're going to say either I get on board or I get off. And, those are tough discussions to have. But again, if you create this culture that's all around the mission, then there's a passion around it and you can feel it. And you walk into organizations and they'll have the mission or the vision statement on the wall. You'll have board meetings,
Yep.
There'll be placards on the board table. And again, you just remind people day in and day out. And then people that are there just for a paycheck are going to say, this isn't what I want to do. And then you almost self-select or I'll say get pushed
You
out by
repel.
you get by your fellow associates who are saying, hey, dude, come on, we're here to feed the hungry. We're here to help, make a difference. And so it almost becomes self-fulfilling.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, culture can be so galvanized and so strong, to your point, that it does start to repel and push people out that are like, okay, this is not really what I signed up for,
Yeah.
whether it's the board or whether it's our staff. And that kind of goes, point number 6, he talks about understand how to best support your for mission ED or CEO. And that's a really good perspective on understanding that the executive director or CEO, that they've got to be supported in a way that the board is pushing them to have a for mission mindset first, as opposed to maybe we have to cut corners because of this dynamic or this other dynamic, but rather the board saying it because it's part of their leadership. Like this is our mission first mindset, and we have to keep this front and center.
Yeah. I thought his 3 points there were so important. The role of the board member with the CEO is strategy, help
Yep.
with strategy, help with influence, whether it's opening doors or helping with board issues, and then guidance. And, it's the old adage, Jamie, very well, eyes and ears in, fingers out. It's not a board member's job to manage the organization. It's to help with how do you get strategies correct? Are you in line with the mission? Are you giving that influence? You as a board member, are you influencing other friends and family or funds to do that and help give guidance? Being a CEO of any organization is a lonely job. And certain times you need to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, am I doing this right? Or what do I help with? And, his last point I thought was great. Talk less and listen more.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that really leads into number 7 as well, which is where he talks about giving as a team sport. And if I'm not listening to my donors, it's really hard to find their passion. And to, I make the comment a lot that one of the biggest issues we have in the field is we're trying to convert zebra lovers to love cats, and people who love cats are already on our boat and never get engaged because we spend a lot of time thinking in other constituencies. And it really hits that. If the board's mission first, if the staff's mission first, if we're equipping our ED, our CEO to be mission first, then the people we're going to want to engage as advocates are people that we know share our vision and value. Back to that team sport of fundraising.
Yeah, because then they become the cheerleaders in the community too. And, they see the impact. And again, it's some of that storytelling and some that's just, we used to have an adage and when I was a commercial lender that if you walked into a business and the first day they gave you a loan application, you kind of said, oh, this doesn't sound good because, it's a transaction. Same thing if you walk in and say, I'd like you to donate to XYZ organization, they give you $1,000. Pretty good chance there's a lot more there that if you had done your job with the mission, done your job with storytelling and build a long-term relationship, that $1,000 could be $100,000.
Absolutely. And the research shows that.
Yeah. Just don't leave
when we
money
focus on the relationship, $100 a year donor doesn't typically remain a $100 a year donor.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's just check the box and move on. So.
Yeah. And number 8, which is still kind of connected to that, he talks about board service isn't for resume enhancement. If we've got a mission first culture, then we're going to be less accepting of people who are on our board because it's just a resume check off. And you've kind of mentioned that. But it does mean, and this is a tension point in the sector, we do, depending on the year, 100 to 150 board evaluations. And it is unfortunately a common thing that we do find board members who, they're not the perceived cat lover. They're on the board because it's a checkoff, because somebody in their company said you need to find a board and we like this organization, you need to be on it. The mayor's appointed, the governor's appointed, the president's appointed. We see this cascade of board service being used as a commodity as opposed to a mission first mindset for leadership.
Yeah. In some of that, Jamie, and you teach this, is you got to do board evaluations, self-evaluations, right? And one of the things that, strong mission-focused organizations, every year they ask their board members, do you still believe in the mission? Are you still willing to give, not just your time and your talent, but, are you going to do the difference? And it's hard because sometimes you got to say to somebody, really, Fred, do you want to be here? And Fred's going to say, yeah, I really don't. But
Right.
but those are things, again, if you create the right culture, some of that's self-select, some of that's the board self-evaluation, some of it's, hiring great people like you to help us through the process.
Thank you. And last point he makes, which is really good, and that is that we're just building a row in the foundation. And I tell people a lot when I teach and when I work with organizations that someone's going to bless you or curse you for what you did or didn't do today. And it's so critical. I mean, just today I had a conversation with a board about they were looking at some adjustments to board structure and some honorary pieces, et cetera. And I just want to make sure that they understand that we're setting precedent, not just for what happens now, but what happens 10 years from now. And we really need to see the board as it is, which is the most intimate, legally charged constituency that we have. And they're donors, volunteers, and advocates. They're charged with the duty of loyalty, obedience, and care. And understanding that we are building a row in the foundation, I really like that perspective, and helping to make sure that when you and I are sitting on a board, that we are constantly asking the question, who inherits this decision, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. The other part of that too, is you build that row, is to celebrate the past, but realize you have to build the next row, and don't be afraid to make changes as you build that next row. So many times we get stuck up in historical perspectives. Well, we've always done it this way. Well, the world's changed, or we've changed. The mission is still the same, but there's different ways to go at it. And I've always believed this is a way you celebrate the past, you get excited for the future, and you're just one row. It's succession planning at its best, right? So, and that succession planning is both for board members and for staff.
Yeah. And that's what I liked. I said, about these points that he makes. You and I could have had a conversation a year ago, and you would echo all these points in a different language. What I liked about the interview that he did, and what you said and what you picked up on, was just the intentionality of putting a different vernacular into the organization. All the things that we've just described are things that if we're truly mission minded as an organization, we're going to naturally gravitate towards those. But what he's doing, and what Mr. Davis does, and what I like about it, is making it intentional to change the social discussion in the organization, to not just say, well, yeah, of course we want to build advocates who love cats and share our vision and values. But it's another vernacular to say, hey, what does that mean? That means we want mission first donors. We want mission first advocates. We want the board to be mission first in every decision they make. Like, it's just how, I think what I really liked about it was it gives a very simple way to just keep socializing the things that we talk about a lot in the sector, but can get lost if we don't have a word or a tag or something that just keeps coming back to it in the culture.
Sometimes, Jamie, it gets lost in the day-to-day, challenges that you face.
Right.
I think it allows you to take a step back. And if you kept these 9 points as a board chair or whatever, and say, are we hitting these points? Are we really focused on the mission? Have we got mission creep? Or, I've seen some boards that, we're focused here, but, we can go over here and make a little bit more money. Well, it's not within our mission, and those are tough discussions. But I think it really comes down to the mission forms the culture, and the culture makes the difference.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I really liked yeah, I'm glad that you caught on to this. You sent it to me so we could come on and talk about it. And again, it just really intentionally shaping our language, which is part of culture in an organization, but being intentional about it. I say to a lot of people that I work with that what we take for granted, we lose. And in organizational culture, and you know this better than I do, with your experience and expertise, I mean, what we take for granted typically gets lost, and then we have to pay somebody or spend a lot of time down the road trying to get back what we had at one point.
No, it's exactly. Hard to put the ketchup back in the bottle.
That's excellent. I'll use that and have to coin you on that one, Bob. That's a great one to end on. It's hard to put the ketchup back in the bottle. Well, Bob, so appreciate
Always
you coming on.
Always good to be with you, my friend.
So glad that you thought to point this out, and I think it'll be just, again, an easy discussion point. I am going to put these points, I'm going to work them into just my copy content, for everybody knows when you see this podcast, it's also going to be on the blog and on the newsletter, so you'll have his contents as well.
Perfect.
So appreciate you coming on again. Thank you, Bob.
All right. Have a great day, my friend.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.